As President of the Church, I affirm the teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ on this issue. Let me be perfectly clear. Any kind of abuse of women, children, or anyone is an abomination to the Lord.
Travis Wayne Goodzone. So, it is frustrating living in a world that utilizes fallacy arguments and considers it truth. It makes no sense to me. For example, because I have demonstrated that having learned that the church isn't true, I've also learned that Jesus is not the Christ. And so people therefore assume that I'm an atheist. It's a false equivalency based on the false dichotomy, because there's plenty more options. And even if it is the Jewish option of a mortal male, it's still a belief in a Christ, which means it's not atheism, which I can tell you right here and now, atheism is false. It's a cop-out for not really wanting to seek for the truth. And as the assassination attempt is entering into the severe coughing stage, I'm getting lots of threats around here of ignorant people who do not understand because they're not medical doctors and they don't know my medical history. And there's a major problem in the church in regards to sexuality that is causing a heightened level of extremism with the fallacies flying all over the place. And I saw Exmo Lex do a video about the church's suppression of sexuality. And apparently she had her other partner, her polygamous partner, with her. All of this came from psychologists. Psychology is not a real science. They do not use logical argument. They use fallacy arguments. And they do not follow the science. They do not utilize scientific methodology or the Socratic method. And so last year, Natasha Helfer, who had been a sex therapist for the church, Family Services, for 25 years, was excommunicated. And there's some major problems with all of this, because what she's trying to claim is kind of typical with what psychologists have been brainwashing Mormons and ex-Mormons into. And whether or not she herself is just brainwashed or she knowingly is brainwashing, it's unclear, but let's go over it. She now claims that she's worshiping in her own way, and was not very clear on what her worship was. And for her to continue to remain Mormon is where all this problem stems from. I'd seen a clip where she talked about being converted to the church as a little girl through her family coming in with the missionaries teaching her how to pray, and that she had many spiritual experiences after that. And that's common for the Mormon conversion of brainwashing, where you get emotivism, which is a fallacy moral argument, to replace what truth is. And so, yeah, I can see why she went into the field of psychology, specifically for sex therapy, because of the feelings that are generated from sex, and therapy and psychology being a complete fraud, similar to the spiritual witness of Mormonism. And I refer you to Manifest in Moroni chapter 10 verses 3 through 5. Guess what? I refer you to Conference, where Irene got up and said, manifest by the same sign. For who? Yeah. Manifest has a definition, and Mormons have been conditioned to redefine things in the church. And it's causing a lot of problems when you redefine words, especially words that are utilized for your living. And psychologists play a big part in that, as they claim to be scientific when they're not. They've redefined science, and thus have redefined other problems. Now remember, she worked for the church, and this is probably why she appealed her excommunication. And I sincerely hope it wasn't because she all of a sudden, or she still believed the church was true. It's just the prophets who are fallen. This is a common feature among the rising generation of Mormons, like that UK Little Nemo, whatever he is, who thinks that he can tell the prophets of the church how to run the church better, rather than quitting the church, taking his Melchizedek priesthood license, and starting his own church. That's how you do it. The United States accepts that. I'm sure the UK has something similar in order to start a church in the UK. But it's a common problem among many of the groups that have been outspoken against the church. Why are you trying to change the church? If there's something wrong, then the church isn't true. So start your own church, rather than tell the prophets to change. Do you understand this? Similar to a marriage relationship, when your spouse physically assaults you, why would you tell him to change? It's time to leave. And too many people get emotionally attached to religion, that despite the abuse, they don't learn the valuable lesson of leave the abuser. Reporting the abuser to law enforcement. But yes, there's a lot of trauma that comes from being abused as people go into a state of shock and disbelief. Is this really happening to me? Are they really doing what they're doing to me? Because you tend to be raised up in a bubble in the church and in your marriage that shocks you, that you are unable to perceive a different reality of being abused. And so, yeah, it is difficult to leave such a relationship. And I can see this with many of the ex-Mormons, with many of the Mormons who are keeping it to themselves or in confidences they can trust, that they disagree with the church on certain things. But I can assure you, the church is not true. It is okay to take that step and leave. But had you been studying and researching to seek the truth, you would have come to realize for yourself that the church is not true. And you wouldn't go through the trauma and the shock. And so I'm kind of concerned that the news is calling all of these who question the church as progressive ideologies. Because it's what psychologists do, which is the same thing that bullies do. They name call progressive, conservative, liberal. Those are name calling. Those are bullying. And they're categories or box categories. And when you can get people to accept and believe in the box category, whether it's progressive, liberal, conservative, alt-right, Nazism, etc., whatever the name calling is, then you treat those in that category, even if it's yourself, that you believe you are that person, which is what psychologists do to you. They keep repeating it over and over again until you believe that you are what they say you are. Then you treat such a category according to the conditions of the category. And that leads to many, many problems. It turns into tribal warfare. It leads to being deceived and conned and scammed and bullied. If you accept that your bully is correct, that you are Four Eyes, and that you have to give them your money and ask parents for money so that you can pay the bully price every day at school, it's the same thing. Psychologists have bigger demands for money. And among the three main progressive ideologies that was listed was pornography, masturbation, and LGBTQ. And one of those things is not like the others. Can you tell me which one is not like the others before the song is through? One of them comes from psychology, whereas the other two come from medical science. And the two from medical science are pornography and masturbation. Medical science. And so, pornography is a modern creation by evangelicals with the specific change in definition, as I am the expert on the original definitions. Porn comes from Greek. It's the same thing as fornication. It's the action of porn. Fornication. I'm a fornicator. And so already you can see that porn and the current definition and fornicator are also incompatible with the definitions that have been created in the modern day time period. Fornication refers to, in the modern redefining, as any kind of copying a feel that arouses sexual desire in another or in yourself. And that's far from reality and is an attempt to further suppress people's natural, scientific, biological sexual functioning. It's an abuse tactic to redefine fornication, as the church has done in such a manner, referring to it also as necking or petting. And so the original porn is the Greek word derived from prostitute. And again, no, not the female. Prostitute is two Greek words combined together. Pro, meaning before, in front of. Institute is any kind of statue. A statute, for example, was carved in stone for the legal laws. So, I'll go to lunch and then do a part 2. I'm back. So, as a woman who works at the temple soliciting for sex, is standing in front of the statues of the Greek temple, she was given the cultural nickname of prostitute. But it has nothing to do with sex and meaning. It was a bullying name category. And so it's kind of important to know the difference between a virgin and a woman in Scripture. As a virgin is a female who has never had a child. And once you've had a child, you are now a woman. And of course, that's been altered in our society in the different definitions. And again leads to lots of confusion and many problems, as the church perpetuates those problems and the confusion with the misdefining of these basic words that used to be well known throughout the ancient cultures. And so as pornography was created by evangelicals in the late 1800s, intended to refer to the expanded definition of just merely a female in any kind of art form, thus imposing prior to, like an anachronism, that all things are pornographic. Sort of like Spencer W. Kimball, when he visited Pompeii, looked at the the historical documents written on the walls and called it pornographic, and that they deserved what they got because of their wickedness. So, in the book of Psalm 115, this comes from the Egyptian documents, as many of them come from the Amarna period of the 18th dynasty. And King David, which is appropriate to call it by King David, 18th dynasty, the David Moses dynasty, the Whoop Mose. He goes on to talk about the heathens asking where the Jewish god Yah is, and it ties into why the Greeks had women solicit sex at the temples, is because of the creation story. I've gone over with you the meaning of Yah from Paleo-Hebrew, which has to do with the creation account in Genesis chapter 1. And thus the women were simply reenacting through ritualistic play the creation of mankind, and was not to be considered heathen. But you can see how it's transformed and mutated into completely something horrifying after all these millennia. As he then goes on to talk about, he is our God, but our God is in the heavens, explaining to the heathen that he's already come to earth and was murdered and was resurrected and ascended, going through the temple rituals, which were first through him. Thus he made the path for the temple rituals, as these heathens also have temple ritual performances, but they migrated out of Egypt and altered the original meaning of the rituals. And so he's clarifying, because these heathen nations at the time of this writing are now considering objects as idols. And he goes, their idols are of silver and gold, the work of men's hands. And they have mouths, but they speak not. They have eyes, but they see not. They have ears, but they hear not. Noses have they, but they smell not. They have hands, but they handle not. Feet have they, but they walk not. Neither speak through their throat. So you can see that the idols were fashioned after humans and assigned as deities. And the concept of idol worship is the belief, i.e. faith, that an object, and it doesn't have to be in the form of a human, any object can have moral, ethical, spiritual power, and that that object can bestow that moral, spiritual, or ethical power onto human beings. And it doesn't have to be moral or ethical in the sense of good, but likewise any kind of bad, negative, fearful connotation as well. And so I see this a lot with religions. They put up demonic idols for their membership to fear, and the church does this too with Lucifer. You know, you want to stay away from anything Lucifer because you need to fear it and blah blah blah. But then they go and then they present Jesus idol, the idol god Jesus. And they don't see that they're presenting the exact same pattern. It's just they're calling their god Jesus instead of Lucifer. It's the pattern that you look for idol worship, not the name. Because otherwise you end up with holy wars. My God's better than your God because we beat you up. And so Natasha was teaching correctly, because it was from the medical professionals, not the psychological professionals, that pornography is not an addiction. It's not addictive. And this blatantly goes in the face of the church. They've been pushing with evangelicals that pornography is the cause of all evil of men. You might as well get a stake and put all the porn there by the stake and then set it afire. Burn the witch. Because that's what they're doing, is they're turning all of these magazines, which was back in that day, magazines, movie reels, and VHS tapes, and then DVD tapes, and then it progresses over time from the paintings and the stone carvings, etc. But again, you're not looking for the outward appearance to redefine things or call it the same. You know, it's the underlying belief that the magazines have power to addict men. That is the problem. And so medical doctors help to confirm through their field of science that this is hogwash, similar to logical argument through the Socratic method. It's not reasonable and it's unsound to claim that pornography is addictive. And then you might say, well, yeah, but men keep looking at porn. Again, it is necessary to teach proper sex ed. And unfortunately, Natasha Helfer, as a psychologist, does not do that, even though she does teach correctly some things. And it's mostly women who want to control men's bodies. And they're the biggest voices for not wanting men to control their bodies. Again, you've been played by the false dichotomy to be weaponized against each other. And so, yeah, if you understood sex ed properly, women would recognize why every once a month they go through the mood shifts, and should not feel ashamed or angry if anybody asks, is this that time of the month? There should be no reason for that, because everybody has been properly sex ed, just like the Egyptians were. They used human body parts, even the sexual organs, in their language, so that everybody, from children all the way up, are constantly taught proper, correct sex ed, because it's in the language correctly, not redefined to cause confusion and contention. And so, yeah, you can already see that with pornography being redefined by evangelicals and the church jumping on board with that it's caused many problems. And it's it needs to be understood that a man's sexual nature is such that he can't turn it off. But it doesn't. There's the white supremacists who tell men to turn it off. And what happens when you turn it off is that you clog the system and you overload, and that causes the mood shifts of men. That leads to criminal activity if it's not relieved. And thus is where masturbation is also a medically confirmed practice as something healthy for men, because it prevents men from going further into their stages of emotional change. And yes, I'm sort of beating around the bush, because to get more specific, I'd have to be more graphic and explain with describing the various sexual organs and how they trigger the brain to say, hey, it's time. And then the man then starts thinking of his fetish in order to release. And the more he goes without, the more intense those thoughts get, until he eventually has a break and commits a crime. And that's why it's very dangerous in marriages, as too often it's claimed to be a joke, used in comedy, but it's not a joke. It's all too often too real, as I've been a victim of the sex abuse in a marriage, where the woman thinks, oh, I've married him now, I've given him a couple of kids, he doesn't need sex anymore, he can control it, he's got me. No, you're not getting it. You're not understanding why he chose you over other women. And then all of a sudden you've changed and you're denying him. And you're trying to control his body. But yeah, that again leads to problems and heartache and pain and misery and divorce and domestic abuse, etc., etc. So it is crucial to have proper sex ed. And so I was interested that there were upwards of 500 professionals who had written to the church demanding that Natasha not be excommunicated, because it would set a very bad precedent that those seeking sex therapy, because our school systems aren't doing it, and the church isn't doing it, and parents aren't doing it, that kids therefore need somewhere to go for proper sex ed. But yeah, it creates many problems when psychologists are the ones stepping up to fill the gap of our school system that refuses to teach the science part of sex ed, and the religion that's anti-science and teaching men to become those aggressive criminal abusers with abstinence. And then parents in the religion and having the school system neglect as they give the parents the choice as to how to teach their kid.
Attention, gentlemen, the Advantage Services shuttle is here.
That there's
the Advantage Services shuttle is here.
a perpetual problem in our society that needs to have a big barrier put up and then everybody re-educated properly. But nope, can't be done. Nobody wants it to be done. And so I also noticed that they quoted from Ballard in regards to what qualifies as somebody getting excommunicated. And on that list are those that the church handbook has come out and said, no, you can't be excommunicated, though the church discourages it, such as incest and fornication. But, so abortion was listed on those. And abortion, if you hadn't paid attention, has now been criminalized in the United States of America with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And as the church is, as I've exposed, trying to restore Zion through sneaking in a clause that violates the First Amendment right that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. This little clause that the church snuck into the Respect for Marriage Act would do just that. It would have a signed by the president congressional law that would grant the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to establish their kingdom of Zion, their religion, and secede from the nation, as the church has corporate interests that would apply here as well. And so, yes, in Mormon Zion, they would criminalize abortion, just as the GOP states want to do. But this would be under the religious banner rather than a government banner. And again, there are many reasons why abortion should be allowed, and the main one being that we need to properly teach sex ed through the science, not allow religious bias to influence government law. And so I don't know if any of you have heard of Protect the LDS Children, excommunicated Bishop Sam Young. What he accomplished was to get the church to force bishops to read from a list of requirements for worthiness, so that children will not be caught unaware and be taught sex ed from their bishop and other inappropriate things of a creepy nature, where bishops are already in trouble legally with their child rape. And also what happened was that the church also allowed for every category of member, except for adult males, to have a witness with them in interview questions. And Natasha is told that she's not allowed to have a witness. And this was last year. This change by Sam Young that the church was forced to make was prior to last year. It was several years ago. And I remember because I helped Sam Young with his publication about what the church did to me as a child being wrongly interviewed by my bishop. I too am a victim as a child. And so I was near the end. Nonetheless, what the church changed under Sam Young was something that was supposed to be for church councils as well, because as much as the church tries to claim that the victim has a voice, they really don't. And she expressed her fears about having to go which, again, you've already identified the church as wrong, and she's still emotionally attached to her abuser. And it's just a matter of severing the tie and going, the church has no power over me, I'm out. And unfortunately, with the church and their dominance as a corporation, they cause lots of damage to those who aren't even Mormon. And that's what people who are not living in Utah do not understand, that if the church succeeds in getting Congress to establish their kingdom, the church will be this full-on abusive organization, and they will criminalize any who rebel. And if you're not in a position to pack up and just leave, you will eventually be incarcerated by the church and tortured. And the government can't step in and do anything about it because they've already made the mistake of violating the First Amendment. And so that's what I learned from Natasha in her excommunication. But also, the church is using psychology as a weapon. Did you catch this? The church was okay with having psychology as part of their family services, getting clients to come in, talk about their feelings, flip the electric switch to shock gaze and try to convert them. Conversion therapy, that's what they were doing since 1959. But it also shows that with the excommunication of Natasha, one of their employees in the field that they approve of, even though it's an anti-science bullying field, they want to tell psychologists how to run their job, their field. And thus they're forcing the educational systems, which, again, this is what will happen under Zion, is that the BYUs who teach psychology will now teach anti-science information, that pornography is an addiction, that masturbation is evil and sinful, and causes many problems for the men's health, etc., and mental state. It takes them away from the spirit. And not just that LGBTQ are to be criminalized and converted through electroshock therapy, which you can't really put therapy with electric shock, it's human torture. But the church is literally wanting to redefine words and deny science to force the educational fields to change the science according to their authoritarianism, their abuse. And it's going on a national level, but the church is in the prime pole position to be the first to make this change official. And it's going to be a horrendous horror that nobody will want to watch, not even Mormons, because they're bringing back polygamy, and because they're bringing back polygamy, they're going to have to dip down into the teenage girls for child brides. It is not going to be pleasant. So, alrighty. Yeah, we'll try to sneak it in. The church's temple endowment ceremony, the law of chastity, prior to 1991 and post Brigham Young's polygamy, said that we shall have no intercourse with someone of the opposite sex, or the contrary sex. And then afterwards, no sexual relations was the wording. And again, sexual relations is taken under the broad definition scope that the church has added to it with. Whereas intercourse is very specific and there's only one way to do it. No. You cannot produce babies any other way. That's the definition of intercourse.